I love how these two are married together as well, where a lot of the problems with our food system are economic, are systemic, where the most affordable food, the most convenient food is also terrible for our health and terrible for our earth. And that's another thing where if we play out the system that we're on, we're only seeing cancer rates rise. We're only seeing obesity rates rise. We're only seeing diabetes and depression rates rise. Why? It's because of the food, which is then linked down to the money. And I sound like a crazy person ranting and raving right
Not
now.
to no,
But
not
it's
to
like,
me. Not to me. You
it's
don't sound
true.
like a crazy person to me, Case. No, it totally is true. It's well documented history. Like just looking back to 1971, where when gold was removed from the system, essentially what happened for your listeners. So, very brief history. 1944, there was this conference called Bretton Woods in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, at the Bretton Woods Hotel in New Hampshire. And essentially, this was after World War II. The United States had a ton of gold because of World War II was being fought overseas. A lot of countries sent their gold to the United States for safekeeping through the war. So then in 1944, they all, leaders of different world countries, they met in New Hampshire, Bretton Woods, and they decided how to structure the next monetary system. So gold was at the center of it. The dollar was pegged to gold at $35 an ounce. And then all the other currencies were then tied to the US dollar. So the US dollar was really the only thing that was tied to gold after 1944. And really going back to Bitcoin and breaking trust, what ended up happening was the US government started issuing too much debt, and eventually creditors of the US government, like France, wanted to repatriate their gold. They were like, listen, the US government, you're spending way too much money. We don't really think you have that much gold on deposit for all the spending that you've been doing over the past decade or so. We want our gold back. So then President Nixon went on TV in 1971. He was just pretty much like, he just rug pulled them and said, we're actually going to depeg the dollar from gold. So because of that, there was a ton of inflation in the United States. And how this links back to agriculture is there's a ton of inflation in the United States. So President Nixon appoints this guy, Earl Butz, as Secretary of Agriculture. And essentially his job is bring down food prices because, the United States population is not happy about how high prices are. People can't afford groceries. You got to do something about these food prices. So this guy Butz, he starts instituting policy, which essentially led to the consolidation of farmland. His big talking point was "go bigger, but go home." So there was a ton of consolidation. Larger farms that benefited from essentially the Industrial Revolution and had like better technologies and productivities were able to do well, while the smaller farms kind of went under or sold out to the larger corporations. So there was a ton of consolidation there. And then that kind of incentivized this monocrop agricultural system where we grow a ton of corn, soy, and wheat. And then we also subsidize it now too. So it's very cheap. So us, the taxpayer, are essentially paying for the poor health of other people kind of in a roundabout way, because our taxes are going to fund these crops that are then being put into these industrial foods, which are cheap to produce. So in a way, it does kind of bring prices down. It does mask inflation a little bit, but at what cost, right? People's health is extremely poor kind of across the board now in the United States especially. So essentially, that's all to say that there was bad inflation in the US in the 1970s, and they had to figure out a way to bring food prices down, and that kind of meant sacrificing the health of people. And shortly after that, we saw the introduction of the nutritional guidelines in the 1970s and 80s, where it's no coincidence that we're producing a ton of corn and wheat, right? So then the nutritional guidelines say you need to eat 6 to 11 servings, I think it was, of grains a day, right? Or whatever, not a day, but you know what I'm saying. So it's no coincidence, right? Like all these incentives kind of play into, from the money, play into the agriculture and the health that we're seeing now 50 years later.
Wow. It's wild from so many angles. And I'm just thinking about Nixon as a president. Like that was a bit of a gangster move to just be like, remove the whole gold standard. Like they must have been somewhat aware of the fact that it would just set our entire nation up for failure, just like a century down the line, or at least put us on a crash course for some serious challenges.
Yeah, no, it, it worked in the short term because essentially the government was like, they called the French called the United States bluff. They're like, yeah, you guys don't have that much gold, and he was just like, all right, well, you're not going to get it back then. But now we are seeing the consequences of money for nothing, and just how it doesn't matter what side of the aisle you are. It really doesn't. Politicians at this point, they're just kind of spending a ton of money, and it's to the detriment of people who don't benefit from that new currency creation. Essentially, like I say, let's say I have $100,000 in my savings account, which I would never do, because I would be losing a lot of money to inflation. But let's say I did, and then they just the government comes out under either Biden or Trump, it doesn't matter who, and they just print 40% of all dollars in 2 years. Essentially, I'm getting devalued my savings by 40%, because everything is going to go up to some degree, maybe more or less 40%. So it's really a shame, and that's kind of why I think Bitcoin's so important, and it all kind of ties in as well to the food, because trying my best to try to educate some ranchers as well on the importance of Bitcoin, because I like to go direct to the farm or a farmer's market and get to meet the people that are producing the food that I eat. I think there's a ton of value in doing that, and it's just great to cultivate that relationship. And in Austin, Texas here, there's actually a surprising number of ranchers and farmers that do accept Bitcoin, but trying to get these people who are in charge of producing our most important thing at a fundamental level as people, and also get them on board and get them, at least get them some safety in Bitcoin and not be kind of exposed in all ways to the US dollar and, potential risks that brings.
Absolutely. It does seem like a really important part of this movement, and really something that has drawn me to the movement in these past couple of years is that marriage between ranching and beef and Bitcoin, sound food, sound money. It's this really fascinating coalescence between two really important parts of life unfolding. These two really helpful tools and technologies, the cow and the coin, the Bitcoin and the bull, just like marrying and converging and coming together to provide us with a way to build a better future, because we've got so many challenges ahead of us, but we've also got these tools, these solutions that we can use to leverage and create that cooler world. It's such a deep and interesting part of becoming a man was just like realizing how everything seems to be kind of like collapsing and cracking under the weight of like decades of just misalignment with incentives. And now here we are, just almost not quite scrambling for solutions, but in a way kind of there's time pressure as well, right? Where it's like we don't have forever. We've got to figure this challenge out, and a lot of that is kind of just like awakening people to the idea, just like raising awareness so that others can become involved and join the movement and use these tools. It's local ranchers, Bitcoin, and then just kind of spreading that.